So were you having that conversation with your grandfather as you were like pushing the pillow on his face?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot of times you want to frame this as a generational warfare issue, but I think it really isn't. It's more of Washington versus America's young, not boomers and the silent generation.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Jared Meyer. He's the co-author with Diana Furchtgott-Roth of Disinherited, How Washington is Betraying America's Young. Jared, thanks for talking to us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
There's a huge generational swindle going on. You guys write in the first page, this is the first generation of young Americans that our government systematically disfavors, and the first generation of Americans whose prospects are lower than those of their parents. They have been disinherited from their birthright. What are some of the actual material indicators that young people are being screwed in a way that is historic?
Well, I think if we look at the unemployment rate right now for people 20 to 24 years old, it's still 10%. What recovery is going on for them when they've been left entirely behind? And it goes even further than that. So not only do they have unprecedented levels of debt, they're coming out of school uneducated and unprepared to work, and there's plenty of government regulations that keep them out from getting a job after they even do finish school.
Okay, well let's walk through some of those. Part one, you guys talk about stealing from the young to enrich the old. So this, you're talking about stuff like Social Security that takes money from relatively young and relatively poor people and gives it to relatively old and relatively rich. You always hear people say, well, you know what, you're going to pay for my health care now, but then your kids will pay for yours. Why isn't this a virtuous cycle?
Well, that's how the program's sold, is that you're paying into it and you're eventually going to get this money back. And I remember I had a conversation with my grandparents, which I'm sure a lot of young people have, about Social Security. And he told me, I've paid into Social Security my whole career, I paid into Medicare, everything I'm getting now, I deserve it. It was my money. But instead, what happened is politicians have sold a false bill. They've said all these programs that you're paying for now, you're going to get the money you paid in later. But they've made promises where they give benefits now and push the cost off to the future, which means that current retirees are getting far more back than what they paid into the system.
So were you having that conversation with your grandfather as you were like pushing the pillow on his face?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot of times you want to frame this as a generational warfare issue, but I think it really isn't. It's more of Washington versus America's young, not boomers and the silent generation.
What about Medicare and Social Security? I think it's in your book you mentioned it's basically about 40%, or 4 out of every $10 that's spent are on those programs, and that percentage is only going to go up. What should be done to Medicare and Social Security?
Well, Social Security is an easier fix. All we need to do is realize that we live in a different age now. People live longer, they're more wealthy when they're older. So what we need to do is increase the retirement age and also index benefits to actual costs of living rather than wages. And so just simple changes around the edges can bring Social Security into balance in long term. Medicare is much scarier, but it's difficult to predict because there could be so much innovation in medicine that costs may go down if we found, let's say, a way to alleviate some forms of cancer. But right now, the current trajectory it's on, I would say Medicare is a much scarier problem.
Well, in an ideal world at least, or in a libertarian world, wouldn't we get rid of these programs? And not simply to say that people should just fend for themselves, but Medicare was predicated, as much as Social Security, on the idea of old people who didn't have insurance and would just die horrible, painful deaths. That's not really the case anymore. Many people are wealthy and can afford their own insurance. So should we shift from an age-based, if we're going to have a government-provided social safety net, should we switch from an age-based one to a needs-based one? Would that be a start?
I think that makes sense, and also just introducing more choice, especially in Medicare. There's no reason you should have to be kicked off your private insurance once you turn 65 just to go on Medicare.
Although legally you must enroll in Medicare.
Yeah, so this doesn't make any sense, and it's because they want to keep up the facade that these are programs that are social insurance, we're all paying for it, but really starting to means test these programs is something we need to do, and it would make it match the reality, which is that they're tax and transfer programs where the young people are being taxed and their wealth being transferred to older Americans.
Part two is keeping young people uneducated, and I'll speak slowly because I realize you're younger than I am. And you talk about the failure of K through 12 education as well as the explosion in college debt. Is it true that education is worse now than it was, say 30 or 40 years ago, the stuff that I see mostly is that results are about the same, but it's just that the cost has gone up 2 or 3 times.
Well, I'd say American students, they have stayed about the same, but the rest of the world has shot ahead of us. So while the rest of the world is adapting and improving their education system, the U.S. education system is stagnating. But this is one of the areas where I'm the most optimistic. We've seen Nevada passing pretty much individualized funding for students that then they can save. We've seen in a lot of urban areas the growth at charter schools, and this is one area that I think the debate's pretty much won, and now we're going to see more and more school choice.
And I mean, the Manhattan Institute, I know, is very free market oriented and interested in the ways in which markets are really discovery processes. One of the things that always struck me as odd is when in an industry as vast as K through 12 education, when you have everybody basically doing the same thing, some kind of weird government enforced monopolies going on, and that might end with individualized learning, right?
Yeah, it could definitely chip away at it, and also chip away at the power of the teachers' unions. And what I've seen, because we talked to a lot of teachers, a lot of students in the book, and we discovered that the teachers' unions aren't even standing up for teachers' interests. Instead, what they're doing is looking out for union bosses and current retirees, and they're making really a system that goes against young teachers as well as students.
Well, we'll leave it there. We've been talking with Jared Meyer. He's the co-author with the Manhattan Institute's Diana Furchtgott-Roth of Disinherited, How Washington is Betraying America's Young. Jared, thanks for talking to us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.